False pages. Uncover hidden history and untold truths.
In the year 1347, 12 ships arrived at the port of Messina in Sicily. The sailors on board were dead or dying. Their bodies were covered in black pus-filled boils that oozed blood and pus. The harbor officials ordered the ships out of the port immediately. But it was already too late. Over the next 5 years, a disease swept across Europe that killed between 30 and 60% of the entire continent's population. Some regions lost 70, even 80% of their people. Entire villages were wiped out so completely that they were simply never rebuilt. In some cities, there weren't enough living people left to bury the dead. We call it the Black Death, and it was the single deadliest event in human history. But here's what most people don't know. The plague didn't start in Europe. It had been traveling for years before it reached those ships in Sicily. And the way it spread, and the way people responded to it, reveals something deeply uncomfortable about how humans behave when they are truly existentially afraid. To understand where the Black Death came from, we have to go back even further, to Central Asia, sometime around 1338. Recent research, including a 2022 study of ancient DNA from graves in Kyrgyzstan, pinpointed the origin of the outbreak to a region near Lake Issyk-Kul. The graves there, dated to 1338 and 1339, contain the DNA of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes bubonic plague. From Central Asia, the plague traveled west along the Silk Road, the vast network of trade routes connecting China to Europe. It moved with merchants, with caravans, with rats hiding in the grain sacks on trading ships. By 1346, it had reached the Crimean Peninsula on the Black Sea, where Mongol forces were besieging a Genoese trading post called Kaffa. When plague broke out among the Mongol army, their commander did something that would change the course of history. He ordered the bodies of plague victims to be catapulted over the walls of the city. It may be the first recorded act of biological warfare. The Genoese merchants inside Kaffa fled by ship. They sailed west toward home, and when they stopped at ports along the way, Constantinople, Messina, Genoa, Marseille, they brought the plague with them. Within 3 years, it had reached every corner of Europe. The symptoms of bubonic plague were specific and terrifying. It began with fever and chills, headaches, exhaustion. Then came the buboes, swollen, painful lymph nodes in the groin, armpits, or neck that could grow to the size of an egg. The skin around them turned black, which is likely where the name Black Death originated, though this term wasn't actually used until centuries later. Most victims died within 3 to 5 days. In its pneumonic form, when it spread to the lungs, it could kill within 24 hours. Medieval medicine had no explanation and no cure. Doctors prescribed everything from bloodletting to burning aromatic herbs to sitting near large fires to counter what they believed were poisonous vapors in the air. None of it worked. Nothing worked. People simply died. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical one. Giovanni Boccaccio, a Florentine writer who lived through the plague, described what he saw in his introduction to the Decameron. Neighbors refused to help neighbors. Parents abandoned children. Children abandoned parents. The social bonds that held communities together simply dissolved in the face of a disease that seemed to strike randomly and kill without mercy. Some people responded with extreme religious devotion, believing the plague was God's punishment for humanity's sins. Groups of flagellants, men who publicly whipped themselves as acts of penance, traveled from town to town across Europe, drawing crowds and, unknowingly, spreading the disease further. Others responded very differently. If death was coming regardless, why not eat, drink, and enjoy whatever time remained? Contemporary accounts describe wild parties, looting of abandoned homes, and a complete breakdown of normal social order in some cities. And then there were the persecutions. Across Europe, Jewish communities were blamed for the plague. The accusation that Jews had poisoned the wells spread as quickly as the disease itself. Between 1348 and 1351, more than 200 Jewish communities were destroyed. Thousands were burned alive. In Strasbourg alone, around 2,000 Jewish people were killed in February 1349, before the plague had even reached the city. Pope Clement VI issued two papal bulls explicitly stating that Jews were not responsible for the plague and ordering their protection. It made almost no difference. Fear, grief, and the need to blame someone overwhelmed reason across an entire continent. By the time the first wave ended around 1353, Europe had lost somewhere between 25 and 50 million people, out of an estimated population of 75 million. But here is the part of the story that almost never gets told. The Black Death didn't just destroy, it transformed. The survivors inherited a fundamentally different world. With so many people dead, land that had been farmed for generations was suddenly empty. Landlords who had once held absolute power over peasants now desperately needed workers. For the first time in centuries, peasants could negotiate. They could demand better wages, better conditions, or simply walk away and work for someone who would pay them more. The rigid feudal system, which had kept the vast majority of Europeans in effective serfdom for generations, began to crack. Not immediately, not easily, but the Black Death accelerated a transformation that would eventually reshape the entire social structure of European civilization. Labor became valuable, people became valuable. The Church, which had been unable to explain or stop the plague, lost enormous moral authority. The intellectual vacuum this created helped pave the way for new ways of thinking about science, medicine, and humanity's relationship with God. Some historians argue that the Black Death, as catastrophic as it was, helped create the conditions that made the Renaissance possible. Out of the greatest catastrophe in human history came the first stirrings of the modern world. The plague returned again and again over the following centuries, in 1361, in 1369, in waves that continued for 300 years. But none matched the devastation of that first terrible outbreak. Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that caused the Black Death, still exists today. Small outbreaks occur every year, primarily in parts of Africa, Asia, and the American West, where it persists in rodent populations. Modern antibiotics can treat it effectively if caught early. We are not as far from the Black Death as we like to think. Here's what I keep coming back to. The Black Death killed 1 in 3 Europeans. It destroyed communities, collapsed institutions, and pushed an entire civilization to the edge of collapse. And yet, humanity rebuilt. The social structures that emerged from the devastation were, in many ways, more equal and more dynamic than what came before. History's worst moments have a way of forcing change that nothing else could. The question is never whether humanity will survive catastrophe. The question is what kind of world we choose to build on the other side. Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if there's a historical event you want False Pages to uncover next, tell me below. Subscribe to False Pages, because the history you were taught was missing something. And we're going to find it.